Okay, I think we're ready to make a start. I know that there are quite a number of people not here yet. I think there's a delay on buses as far as we know. Sarah, is that right? Yes. So others will be joining us as the day goes on. But I'd just like to say a very warm welcome to you all. I know some of you have travelled a very long way to be here today, so well done for getting here on time at this time in the morning. I'm John Turbeville. I'm the chair of the advisory group at Therapeutic Communities, and I'm also director at the Mulberry Bush School. I'm going to try and keep things on track here today. So welcome. This is our 13th annual forum and the first actually at the Royal College of Psychiatrists here. So it feels really good to be back in the building or in the building here today. A few housekeeping bits and pieces. There isn't a fire drill planned for today, so if the alarm does go off in an orderly fashion, please, if you make your way to the front of the building, and then people will guide you from there where you need to be. Toilets, you may well have found the toilets. I think many of you had coffee downstairs, so there are toilets on the other side of the reception area downstairs, and they're in a similar place on this floor just across the landing. Smokers, we are politely requested that smokers don't smoke right at the front of the building. They're asked to sort of move away, up or down the street. Lunch and tea this afternoon will be served in the same place that you had coffee, so that's down on the ground floor in the members area. And at lunchtime, this room needs to be completely reorganised. So when you go for lunch, if you could take jackets, bags, all that sort of stuff with you, and then we'll be reorganising the furniture in this room. As you can see at the back there, Craig is filming this conference. So if anybody doesn't wish to be filmed, if you could just let Josie or Sarah know, or Craig, of course. And my guess is the central filming belt sort of is in this middle bit here, so it may be advisable to sort of sit outside that if you don't want to be filmed. Mobile phones, the usual reminder, if you could put them on silent or turn them off, that would be fantastic. I know some of you will probably need to have them on, just in relation to work. Okay, that's housekeeping things, I think.
Just a reminder that the first break is not your...
Yeah, I'll go through the programme. Okay, so I also wanted just to say about the national report. So out there on the table, you'll see some copies of the national report. There are some there for reference purposes, but the team will be sending them out next week by email. They'll also be on the website. And I would just encourage you to read it, for one thing. Have a really good look through it, and it's really helpful to have your comments and feedback on both what is in the national report, but also anything that you might want to see in future in the national report. I suppose some of the interesting things just to comment on is that we know that many of our services are under major threat, particularly the NHS TCs, and they're finding it hard to survive. So I think it's important that members know that. Our relationship with the prison service is still really strong, and I think the contract's up for renewal next year. And we wanted just to pass on our best wishes to Kirk, who I know has been very ill recently. Many of you will know Kirk Turner. So our best wishes to him. In terms of membership, you'll see in the national report that about a third of our members are quite new. Another third are really quite established members. And we really benefit from that. So if you're a new member, you're a more established member, or somewhere in the middle, I just would encourage you to get involved. It's really, really helpful if you get involved. One of the things that's highlighted in the report is the lack of feedback, the feedback forms. We don't get that many of them. So please, if you have your peer review or your audit, you have a feedback form. We really are grateful if you complete it and hand it back in. With all of that in mind, I suppose I just wanted to say a little bit about the reference and advisory groups. As a member or potential members, I know you maybe aren't all members, but all members have a seat on their reference group. Okay, and I really would encourage you to attend. We've restructured the way these things work over this last year. We meet 4 times a year. We meet here in these rooms and in this large forum here. And what we do is we meet as a reference group. So your network has a reference group that meets during the morning. And then we meet at the end of the morning as a larger community of those communities. And then the discussions from the morning feed the advisory group in the afternoon after a lunch. So we have lunch all together, usually in the side room over here. So I really would encourage you to take up your space on your reference group, okay, and really feed the discussion into the advisory group in the afternoon and really become active members. It really is helpful. In terms of the programme for today, just to take you through that, in a moment, Sarah and Josie are going to talk about this year's cycle and give us an update, various facts and figures, talk to us about how this cycle has gone. We then have a conversation between members of our service user reference group. So that'll take place here, and there'll be an opportunity, I think, for comments, questions during that. We then have a comfort break. There's no refreshments or coffee during that break. We've got about 10 minutes. So if I could ask you to be prompt so that you're back in time for Nick Benefield's talk, which he is going to talk to us about play between 11:30 and 12:30, and we'll sort of juggle opportunities for comments and questions during that time. As I said, we then need to clear the room over lunchtime. Lunch is being served downstairs. And then after lunch, we have an experiential workshop with the gamelan drummers. And that's an occasion which I really would encourage you to get involved. But I would also say to you, don't have to. So don't panic. If you don't want to be involved, you want to observe, that's absolutely fine. But we're hoping to make lots of noise and communicate with the rest of the building. Workshops. We have our workshops after that. Signing up for the workshops is on the table out in the foyer outside. And I'll let you know where those workshops are meeting just before lunch. Okay, but we're using these breakout rooms and the 2 rooms behind us, so they're not far to go. Okay, we then have a refreshment break, so time for a cup of tea or coffee. And then we have our debate, which is on effective reflective practice requires external facilitation. So we've got 4 people speaking for and against that motion. And we're finishing off with a community meeting. So I'm hoping that we'll sort of put the chairs out into a big circle, and then that's really an opportunity for any thoughts or feedback about the day, just to finish off together. Okay. Are there any questions or observations from any of that anybody wants to make before we get going? No? Okay. Well, welcome. Hope you enjoy the day. Do get involved. And I'll now hand over to Sarah and Josie. Are you taking this, Sarah?
I think I might be.
Yes.
Let's pass the mic, not pass the parcel. Hi, for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Sarah Paget. I'm the Programme Manager of the Community of Communities. I have the privilege of having had that role for the past 11 years, actually. And Josie is the Deputy Programme Manager and is going to be talking. We're both going to talk to you really about the annual cycle and what we've been up to over the last year. It might be, I'm sure that, well, in fact, I know that Josie's going to talk a little bit about the annual cycle, but for some people, I wonder whether people are very aware that the cycle runs from April through to March, and it's a very sort of specific annual cycle. And this time of year tends to be the year when we reflect on what we achieved last year and think about where we are going forward. And many of you will have received lots of emails about membership and about activities and standards and peer reviews for this year. So this is the beginning of our new cycle, but the conference is a celebration of the last. And I guess what I wanted to do was to say something just to add to what John has said regarding the membership. We have an enormously diverse membership. What might be of interest to some people here is that we had our first annual forum in 2002. And that annual forum we had about 60 people, and we're actually expecting about 170 today. And those 60 people met at the Royal College of Pathologists. And for the first sort of 2 or 3 years, we that's where we met. And there were plenty of jokes around it being a dead good conference and all of that. But what I find intriguing is that this is our first conference here at the Royal College of Psychiatrists. This is the relatively new building. We've been here now for more than a year, but it'd be new to some of you. And the Royal College of Pathologists have come and joined us. They're now resident on the 4th floor of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. So I did hope that somebody could make some similar comments about how dead good this conference is. So, but what has changed during the last sort of 13 years or so has been the membership, and whereas there are aspects of joy to be had in relation to that, and we can see here the number of children and young people's therapeutic communities that are part of the network, half pretty much of our membership come from the children's sector, and that's fantastic to see. We also have, a large proportion of our members from what is called the adult democratic therapeutic communities. This was a term used to distinguish the communities from addiction communities that see themselves as structured or hierarchical therapeutic communities as opposed to democratic therapeutic communities. And the group that we see as being in that sector, that 30%, would be services for adults in the NHS and services for adults across within mental health, so people working with people with severe and enduring mental health problems. And it's this sector that's taken a battering. The majority of this sector is public sector, so you would find, or if not in the public sector, funded by local authority funding. And it is this sector, and I'm really sad actually that that we've got an enormous number of people coming from 2 therapeutic communities in NHS settings that are actually the people who are delayed on the coaches at the moment, because we were sort of wanting for us to sort of send them our best really, because they really are under the cosh to a large extent. There are some that are thriving. Down in Kent, we have a new therapeutic community, relatively new therapeutic community that's been set up in the NHS down there. But generally speaking, across the country, there tends to be a reduction of therapeutic communities in those sectors. We still have a small number of addiction communities, as you can see, and the prison therapeutic communities are still very strong, and our relationship with them is still very strong. And then we have a small number of learning disability therapeutic communities. These are in the prison sector also. But our wider membership of learning disability communities that many of you will have met at previous conferences have also undergone an enormous change and to their methods. So people who have heard about Camp Hill communities, intentional therapeutic communities, they've withdrawn in the last year or so because of the threat to their survival and the need for them to reflect on where they are. So there's really good news in terms of the ideas that are developing across the children's sector. There being an enormous surge of interest in creating healthy psychosocial environments for children. And I think one of the things that is important in relation to this is that it does create a massive diversity, not just in terms of sectors, not just in terms of children, but also in terms of concepts and theoretical ideology. I think when we started in 2002, there was a very clear idea of what therapeutic communities are and what therapeutic communities were members. And I think over time, we've received more interest from people wanting to become therapeutic communities, wanting to use therapeutic community principles in their environments. Some people not quite so sure about becoming full therapeutic communities, but finding the standards helpful in some way. And I think many of you will have heard along the way this term positive environments, the enabling environments, psychologically informed environments. These terms tend to be sort of battered around and spoken about at various conferences, and I wanted to spend a few moments just explaining what they are, because we're hoping soon to be able to launch, if you like, a kind of quality approach or quality improvement approach to positive environments, so that people can see themselves on a spectrum of therapeuticness, if you like, whereas therapeutic communities perhaps are one part of something that is a much wider approach. But before I do that, I wondered how many people here would say that they are from the children's sector? If you put your hand up. So quite a lot, okay. How many people here would say that they work for the NHS, in the NHS? Well, work or are a service user, sorry, in the NHS. Okay, a good number. What about prisons? How many people are here from prisons? Fair. And people working for therapeutic communities with people with severe and enduring mental health problems, sort of mental illness per se. Very small number. Is there anybody here working with learning disability? Okay, small number. Have I missed anybody? Anybody working with another client group that I haven't mentioned? Or in a sector I haven't mentioned? No, okay. Of course, and then we have Christchurch Deal, which always sort of gets sidled off into other, usually, which is a church that has a therapeutic approach. And of course, I see Kipseli, who have got arguably have to have come the longest distance and will have come from Athens to be here, and who we have a very good relationship with, and who operate a therapeutic community sort of similar to Christchurch Deal, you know, not a faith-based community, but a community that is dispersed, and that where people sort of come to be part of an environment in much more of a kind of lifestyle way, more than just specific treatment or therapy. So I want to just spend 5 minutes, I have 5 more minutes, just want to spend 5 minutes thinking about what we mean about enabling environments, what we mean by therapeutic childcare or psychologically informed environments, and what we mean by therapeutic communities. This isn't brilliant, by the way. There's plenty of work to be done on this process, but I think sometimes people wonder about the way in which these ideas, we have here a sister project to the Community of Communities, which is the Enabling Environment Award. How many have heard of the Enabling Environment Award? See, it's not as many as I thought, actually. And how many people here have heard and maybe arguably would describe themselves more as therapeutic childcare or a PI than as a therapeutic community? Okay, not as many as I thought. That's fantastic in some ways. So I do want to, however, talk about the various spectrum that we have of services that want to become members of Community of Communities, and which we have developed processes to support and to help. I start with enabling environments because an enabling environment is an environment that is generic. This is an environment that has no specific therapeutic approach or framework. It's a place that provides good quality care within a supportive environment, and that environment facilitates development and learning. It's the kind of environment that any one of us would want to work in, or be treated in, or be educated in. And the idea behind it is that these exist anywhere. They exist everywhere. Good quality services as opposed to those that are not, and that we can all recognize them quite instinctively. Staff are adequately supported, and the leadership supports openness and staff and service user involvement. Very simple, very basic building blocks to a good quality approach. So then there are those people who want to take this a little bit further, what we might call therapeutic childcare, or what we might call a psychologically informed environment. This is where the approach, people are mindful of the approach and it is psychologically informed. There is a therapeutic approach, and people have thought about it in a sort of psychological terms. It is a place where perhaps the people going there have a purpose, a specific purpose, and a therapeutic purpose. And that there are interventions taking place within it. In an enabling environment, you wouldn't necessarily have a psychologist or any form of therapy going on. It would just be a place where people will maybe go out for those sorts of issues. In a therapeutic childcare setting or a psychologically informed environment, these things are within the service itself. Staff have regular supervision, and which supports reflective practice, and the leadership is open and supports service users, is active in supporting staff and service user involvement. And then we have therapeutic communities. This is why we're all here. Therapeutic communities have a clear method and approach. There's a strong theoretical basis. We know what we're doing. We have standards that say this is how you deliver a therapeutic community. Therapeutic communities tend to be an intervention. They tend to be a treatment delivered by trained staff and people who are trained, and we now have the core competencies, so we can actually ensure that we know that they're trained the way that we think people in therapeutic communities should be. And staff and service users work together to maintain the safety of the therapeutic environment. This is key. This is critical, really, to the idea of the therapeutic community, and it's the idea that creates some difficulty. I urge people to go back and read about the Northfield experiment, about Bridger, Harold Bridger, and beyond, to sort of look at the start of that, where those ideas came from, that people actually can come together, work together to create a safe environment. Staff have supervision as a group, always very contentious as a standard. It's not to say there isn't individual supervision, but that there is supervision as a group. And leadership is open and facilitates the democratic approach to running the community. I hope that these three things demonstrate the difference between each of these three aspects, and also to some extent demonstrate the difficulty that some people perhaps have with the therapeutic community standards, which are very focused at being a therapeutic community, but can be utilized by others on any of this spectrum to become more therapeutic. In terms of how they all fit together, well, there is no such thing as a gold star. We're not all wanting therapeutic communities all over the world. Well, some of us aren't. Some of us are. But, it's not that we think everywhere should be a therapeutic community. Not everywhere should be a therapeutic community. Sometimes a psychologically informed environment or a therapeutic childcare setting is perfectly fine. I mean, that's what's required. And sometimes an enabling environment is what's needed. So it's not like we're looking for people to go from being an enabling environment to a TC, but it's that you can't be a psychologically informed environment without being an enabling environment first. And you can't really be a therapeutic community without being a psychologically informed environment. But you can stay as a psychologically informed environment, or you can stay as an enabling environment. So what we're not wanting, when we launch or when we talk about the kind of integrated system of quality work for therapeutic community, for positive environments, we're thinking of this spectrum. Some of you might be sitting here with other services within your sector, thinking, actually, we've got this therapeutic community, but there are other services that are doing sort of therapeutic work. Well, we have support and approaches and even standards to support this. So watch this space. Anybody interested in helping us to think about this a little bit more and how they all fit together? Put your name down. Always interested to hear. But today, we are talking about therapeutic communities. And we're here to celebrate membership of Community of Communities. And as John rightly said, this is the 13th annual forum of the Community of Communities, and our 13th annual cycle, and we're moving into our 14th annual cycle. So Josie and the rest of the team, who we haven't named, but Aaron Das, who is around over there, Laura Simmons, who is outside, hiding as usual, We are the team, Community of Communities team, that have delivered the cycle to you, and Josie is going to talk to you a little bit more about it now. So I'll hand over to Josie Thorne. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Welcome, everybody. It's good to see so many of you here today. So as Sarah said, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's been going on over the last cycle at Community Communities, talk a little bit about sort of the standards and how people are doing against the standards, and then talk a little bit about the coming cycle and what we've got going on this coming cycle. So if we have a think about what went on over the last year, sorry, I think there's a big group of people coming in. Yes? Oh, don't all stare. Make them feel very uncomfortable. Great. There are some seats at the back and some at the front if you want to grab a seat. Okay, so as I was saying, we've had a number of events over the last cycle. So we had another successful art competition, which hopefully some of you submitted artwork to, and you can see some of the entries there. We'll be rerunning it this year as well, so if you want to start thinking about submitting some entries for the art competition, we'd love to see lots of you getting involved. Again, we had peer reviewer and lead reviewer training workshops, and we'll be running them again this year. We had 3 workshops last cycle, and particularly the ones about introduction to group work were very successful. So we'll be running them again this year, but also going to the next stage, so thinking about an intermediate group workshop. And I'm happy to say that 2 of those workshops will be in Leicester, and one of the peer reviewer training workshops will be in Manchester. So we're trying to sort of spread out, so not to be so London-centric. So hopefully that'll be handy for some of you. And we have also published our spring edition of the newsletter, so that should all be in your pack. So if you want to have a read, we had lots of brilliant articles from the members this year, so if you want to have a look at that and see what people are up to. We'll also be publishing another one in autumn, so if you have any ideas for anything you want to submit to that, then please do. So thinking about the standards, so that is sort of our basis for the network. I don't really want to use the word performance, but thinking about how people work towards the standards, looking at the core standards, which are what we really see as being critical for being a therapeutic community, you can see over the last 3 cycles, it's roughly stayed the same with regards to the percentage of people meeting those core standards, so over 80%. We're hoping to sort of increase that over the years, and hopefully this next cycle, with very little change to the standards, hopefully we'll see some improvements on those numbers this cycle. So as Sarah said, Community of Communities is split into a number of different networks. And so we thought it'd be interesting to break this down and have a look at those different networks to see where people are performing on the different core standards. Oops. So you can see that the purple one's the NHS communities. You can see that they score very highly on a number of the core standards. And for example, CS4, which is about involvement in maintaining and setting and maintaining community boundaries. So they managed to get people very involved in those. And a standard which all the sectors perform very highly in actually is about community members sharing responsibility for the emotional and physical safety of each other. And that's really positive to see that all TCs are able to do this and are really strong in this area, so that's really positive. The severe and enduring mental health communities, which is sort of how we term them, they score a little bit lower on some of the standards regarding involving community members. So this one about involving members in setting, maintaining community boundaries, and also running, taking part in the day-to-day running of the community. They find it a bit harder to meet those specific standards, and we could try and think about how we can support them to do that. So thinking about the feedback from the last cycle, from host communities of how they found the peer review experience. Feedback overall has been positive. As John said earlier, we didn't get as much feedback as we wanted, so we're going to try and make it easier for you to give us feedback this cycle. Something which is encouraging is that people are still learning something from the review day. As Sarah said, we have a lot of communities who have been members for over 10 years, so it's great to hear that they're still taking part and they're still learning something from the process. Okay, so just a quick slide about what we'll be doing this coming cycle. So I'm not sure if any of you have heard of Space House, which is an online tool that we have developed here for children and young people's communities. And the aim of Space House is to try and enable children and young people to get more involved in the self-review process, so actually getting them involved in talking about the standards. So we've developed a story, an interactive story for children and young people to go through and answer some questions which are based on the standards. I think I've got a couple of minutes and I can show you a couple of quick screens of it so you can just have a look and see what it looks like. But we'll be really encouraging children and young people services to be using it this cycle and to try and be getting young people more involved in the process. As John said, we'll be looking for new members to join the advisory group and also the accreditation panel. So if you're thinking you want to get more involved with the governance of community communities, then we'll be looking for new people to join those groups. We'll also be looking for new people to become lead reviewers and independent peer reviewers. And the next session will be about that, so hopefully that will give you a bit more information about those roles. And we'll be publishing the 9th edition of the Community Community Standards. And as I said, we've only made very minor changes to those standards, so hopefully you'll all feel quite familiar with them and be working with them. So if I can just show you Space House. I'll just show you a few slides so you can see what it looks like.
Coming up at Space House, everyone was pondering over what to do with their free time. The whole community of Space House would have a meeting every week. Do you have meetings at your home? When do you have your meetings? All asked everyone what they wanted to do in the half-term holidays.
I've got a great plan,
Said Om.
let's go to the moon.
Yeah, said everyone. So they all settled on the idea that they could go to the moon. Does everyone make decisions together in your community? It was the
Okay,
morning of the moon trip.
I'm going to leave it there.
Very exciting.
Sorry, you're all getting into it. But if you do want to have a look, then we can send you the link and you can sort of have a go through it. And for children and young people, would really like you to try and use that this cycle. There is a version without the story, so just sort of the questions for older young people who may find it a little bit too young for them. But I'm afraid I'm going to have to finish it there. Just one last slide. About the events coming up for this cycle. So as I said, we'll be running workshops and lead review and peer review training events. All of these will be on our website though if you want to have a look at that, and we'll be sending out information over the coming weeks about those events as well. Okay, I hope you enjoy the rest of today, and I will hand over to the next presentation. Okay.